Rejected Omega hid 12 wolves, by dawn the Alpha King declared her Luna. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main character. Emily Harris stood in the middle of the pack's grand hall, her heart sinking with each passing moment. Her body trembled slightly as the alphas and betas around her whispered, casting judgmental looks her way. She had been waiting for this moment her entire life, yet today, the inevitable happened. The ceremony of choosing a mate had begun, and one by one, every Omega had been claimed. But Emily stood alone, as usual. Her scent, though present, wasn't the one that called to the alphas. It was faint, unremarkable, and worst of all, it seemed as though it carried no promise of strength. Her lack of scent made her invisible in a world where the strength of an Omega's aura was everything. She had no pack to protect her, no alpha to claim her. To the others, Emily was nothing but a failed Omega, one who would never be chosen. As the last Omega before her was claimed, Emily lowered her gaze. She had prepared herself for this. No one would choose her. The whispers of pity and mockery stung, but she held her chin high. She had been trained to bear this shame, to live with the constant reminder that she was less than others. As the last of the alphas stepped forward, their eyes passed over her without a second thought. The rejection was final, and she could already hear the cruel whispers around her. Rejected again. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Emily clenched her fists, her heart aching with the weight of loneliness and isolation. Without saying a word, she turned away from the ceremony. Her steps were slow, but each one carried her further away from the hall, away from the judgments that filled the air. She walked through the woods, the quiet of the trees embracing her. As she stumbled upon a clearing. There, hidden beneath the shadows of the forest, she discovered 12 wolves, young, injured, and helpless. Emily's heart ached at the sight of them. She knelt down, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch one of the wolves. The moment her fingers brushed against its fur, something strange happened. A warm glow surrounded her hand, and she felt an overwhelming connection to the creatures before her. She didn't know how, but she felt their pain, their fear, and their need. And somehow, despite everything she had been told, she knew she could help them. As she began to work, the wolves slowly calmed under her touch. She poured her energy into them, soothing their injuries with a gentleness that even surprised herself. She wasn't sure how it was possible, but the magic inside her seemed to awaken with each passing moment. The wolves' wounds began to heal, their breathing steadied. They were responding to her. Emily's tears welled up, not from the pain of rejection, but from the joy of knowing she could do something, anything right. But before she could fully comprehend the magnitude of what was happening, a voice cut through the stillness. "What is this?" The voice was deep, commanding, and carried an undeniable authority. Emily turned to see him, a tall figure cloaked in darkness, his eyes piercing through the forest shadows. The Alpha King had arrived. He had been watching from a distance, observing her actions, and now, he stepped forward into the clearing. His gaze locked onto hers, and in that moment, Emily felt a surge of power, of recognition. It was as if everything in her life had led to this moment. The Alpha King's voice was low and powerful, yet there was a softness to it that only she could hear. "You," he said, his voice filled with awe and something else, something deeper. "You are not just any Omega." Emily's heart raced, and before she could respond, the Alpha King stepped forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. The weight of his touch was unlike anything she had ever felt. "By dawn," he said, his voice commanding the pack's attention, "I declare you my Luna." The night fell quiet around Emily as she stood there, still reeling from the Alpha King's words. His presence was overwhelming, a force of nature she had never encountered before. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, as though he was studying her every move, every breath. The wolves she had healed now lay quietly at her feet, their wounds completely healed, their bodies relaxed. The air was thick with anticipation, the forest almost holding its breath. The Alpha King, standing tall and commanding, was unlike any man Emily had ever seen. His appearance was rugged, his posture regal, and his eyes, their intensity was enough to make anyone shiver. Yet, there was something in his gaze, something that spoke of a deep understanding, as though he had seen things no one else could. "You healed them," he said softly, his voice carrying a hint of awe. Emily blinked, still not fully understanding the weight of the situation. I just wanted to help," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The Alpha King's lips curled into a slight smile, though it was filled with something fierce, something unyielding. "You did more than help," he replied. "You awakened something. Something that has been dormant for far too long." Emily didn't know what to say. She had never thought of herself as someone capable of doing anything extraordinary. She was just Emily, the Omega who had always been overlooked, rejected by the pack, unwanted. Yet here she was, standing in front of the Alpha King, a man whose very presence made her heart race. The Alpha King stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. His voice was firm but gentle when he spoke again. "You are not like the others. You are not like any Omega I have ever encountered." Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. Was he talking about her? Did he really mean it? She tried to step back, but her feet were frozen in place, as though her body refused to move. The Alpha King's eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw something like warmth in them. "You are more than just an Omega, Emily. You are my Luna." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and for a moment, Emily couldn't comprehend what he was saying. Luna? The term echoed in her mind, but it didn't make sense. She was nothing. She had always been nothing. And yet, here was the Alpha King, standing before her, declaring her as his mate. Emily's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. She opened her mouth to protest, but the Alpha King raised his hand, silencing her. "This is not a choice. It is fate," he said, his voice filled with a certainty that left no room for argument. "I have watched you, Emily. You are not just some broken Omega. You have power inside you, power that calls to me, that calls to this pack. You will lead beside me, not behind me. Together, we will restore what was lost." His words sent a shiver down her spine. She had never imagined that someone like him, someone so powerful, so commanding, would see anything in her, let alone claim her as his Luna. The Alpha King reached out, his hand gentle as it rested on her shoulder. "Do not be afraid. You are not alone anymore." His touch was warm, reassuring, and for the first time in her life, Emily felt like she belonged. She looked up into his eyes, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt hope. The wolves around them stirred, their energy shifting with the Alpha King's declaration. Emily realized, in that moment, that her life had changed forever. And the world she had once known, the world where she was invisible, ignored, was gone. In its place stood something new, something full of possibility. The Alpha King had claimed her, and with him, Emily felt she could finally claim her own destiny. Emily stood at the edge of the clearing, her heart still racing from the Alpha King's declaration. She had never imagined that something like this could happen to her. From the moment she had been born, she had always felt like an outsider, like someone who didn't belong. But now, here she was, standing in the presence of the most powerful man in the kingdom, and he had claimed her as his Luna. The weight of the situation was still sinking in, and Emily could hardly believe it. She looked around at the wolves she had healed, their eyes filled with gratitude, as if they too understood the significance of the moment. They were not the only ones watching her, though. The pack had begun to gather in the clearing, their eyes full of curiosity and suspicion. Emily could feel their gaze upon her, but it no longer held the same sting it had before. She was no longer the rejected Omega, the one who had been cast aside by her own pack. She was something more now. The Alpha King had spoken, and she had been chosen. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. It was the Alpha King, walking towards her with a steady, confident stride. His presence was undeniable, and for a moment, she felt small in comparison. But as he came closer, she saw something in his eyes, something that softened, something that spoke of a connection between them that went beyond mere fate. "You are not like the others," he said, his voice low and steady. "You are strong, Emily. Stronger than you realize." Emily swallowed, the weight of his words settling in her chest. "I've always been weak," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I've never been able to do anything right." The Alpha King shook his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "You have done more than you know. You saved those wolves. You healed them, not with magic, but with your heart. That is what makes you strong." His words were like a balm to her soul, and for the first time in a long time, Emily felt the tight grip of self-doubt begin to loosen. The Alpha King stopped in front of her, his towering presence making her feel both small and safe at the same time. He reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You are mine now," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "And I will protect you, always." Emily's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had never known such certainty, such warmth. For the first time, she felt like she had a place in this world, a purpose. "I don't know what I can offer you," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm just an Omega. What if I'm not enough?" The Alpha King's gaze softened, and he smiled, a small but reassuring smile. "You are more than enough. You are everything I've been waiting for." Emily felt a lump form in her throat, and for a moment, she was at a loss for words. The Alpha King had spoken of fate, of destiny, and she had always thought that such things were for others, those who were strong, those who were meant for greatness. But now, standing before him, she began to realize that perhaps, just perhaps, fate had something greater in store for her than she had ever imagined. "You are not alone anymore," the Alpha King continued, his voice soft but resolute. "From this moment forward, we stand together. As equals. As partners." Emily looked up at him, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't name. She had never been one to believe in fairy tales, in destiny, but as she looked into his eyes, she felt the pull of something undeniable. This was her future. And for the first time, she was ready to face it. The Alpha King turned and gestured for her to follow. "Come," he said, his voice filled with purpose. "There is much to be done." As they walked side by side, the pack began to disperse, their whispers fading into the distance. Emily felt a sense of calm settle over her, the weight of the moment still heavy but no longer overwhelming. She was no longer just Emily, the rejected Omega. She was Emily, the Luna of the Alpha King. And she was ready to embrace her new life, whatever it might bring. The days that followed Emily's declaration as the Luna of the Alpha King were filled with new beginnings and unexpected challenges. At first, it was hard for her to grasp the full scope of her new role. She had spent so long feeling like an outsider, like someone who didn't belong in this world of alphas and betas, where power and strength ruled every decision. But now, with every passing moment, she was learning more about herself and the strength she never knew she had. The Alpha King, Alexander Thorne, was not just a ruler, he was a man of honor, of integrity, and as Emily spent more time by his side, she began to see the depth of his kindness and his pain. He had been through much in his life, more than anyone could ever imagine, and yet, he carried the weight of his responsibilities without complaint. Emily's presence seemed to soften the burden he carried, and she could feel the connection between them growing stronger with each passing day. As Luna, Emily was no longer just a passive observer of the pack's affairs. She was now an active participant in the decisions that shaped their future. Alexander often called on her for counsel, and her insights, though initially hesitant, proved to be valuable. She had a unique perspective, one that was not clouded by the need for power or control. Her heart was pure, and her intentions were always rooted in the well-being of the pack. She quickly became known for her wisdom, her empathy, and her ability to lead with compassion. One afternoon, as Emily sat in the grand hall of the Alpha King's palace, she found herself lost in thought. The weight of her new life was sometimes overwhelming, but there was a sense of peace that came with knowing she was not alone. Alexander entered the room, his presence commanding, yet comforting. "Emily," he said, his voice soft but filled with authority, "I need to speak with you." She looked up from the scroll she had been reading, her heart skipping a beat at the sight of him. "What is it, Alexander?" she asked, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. There is something I must tell you, he began, taking a seat beside her. The pack is facing threats from outside our borders. Rogue wolves are growing bolder, and the peace we've worked so hard to establish is in danger. Emily's heart tightened at his words. She had known there were dangers, but she hadn't realized just how close they were. What can we do? She asked, her voice firm with determination. We must prepare, he replied. I will not let anything harm our pack, Emily. But I need you by my side, as my Luna, to help guide us through this. Emily nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of fear and pride. She had never imagined her life would take this turn, that she would stand beside an Alpha King, leading a pack through such perilous times. But now, standing here with Alexander, she knew she was ready. She would do whatever it took to protect their future, to protect their pack. The bond between them was undeniable, stronger than anything Emily had ever felt before. It was more than just a claim, more than just fate. It was love, a love that would carry them through the darkest of times. I'm with you, Alexander, she said, her voice unwavering. Always. Alexander reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. Together, he said, his voice filled with conviction. We will face whatever comes our way. And in that moment, as they stood side by side, Emily knew that nothing could break the bond they had forged. Together, they would protect their pack, their future, and the love they shared. The road ahead would not be easy, but they would walk it together, as equals, as partners, and as mates. The days grew longer as Emily settled into her new role as Luna. She was no longer just a rejected Omega, she was the Alpha King's equal, standing beside him with newfound confidence. The weight of leadership was heavy, but Alexander never let her carry it alone. Together, they worked tirelessly to ensure the safety of their pack, preparing for any threat that might arise. Their bond had deepened, becoming stronger with each passing day. Emily had never known such a connection with another person. It was as if their souls were intertwined, linked by something far beyond their control. Alexander trusted her, and in turn, she trusted him completely. As the Alpha King's Luna, Emily was involved in every decision that affected the pack, from strategy to diplomacy. She had a voice, and it was heard. For the first time in her life, she felt like she truly mattered. Yet, despite all the progress they had made, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was looming on the horizon. The threats from rogue wolves were growing stronger, and there were whispers of betrayal within their own pack. One evening, as Emily sat in the palace library, going through reports from the scouts, Alexander entered, his face tense. She looked up, her heart sinking at the sight of him. What's wrong? She asked, her voice filled with concern. He walked over to her, his brow furrowed. The rogues are organizing. They've joined forces with a pack that has been disbanded for years. We don't know how strong they are, but we need to prepare. Emily stood up, her mind racing. How long do we have? A few days at most, Alexander replied, his tone grim. We need to act quickly. Emily nodded, her mind already formulating a plan. She had never been one to back down from a challenge, and now, as Luna, she had a responsibility to protect her pack. We'll do whatever it takes, she said firmly. Alexander's eyes softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. We will face this together, he said, his voice filled with conviction. The next few days were filled with meetings and preparations. Emily worked closely with Alexander and the pack's warriors, strategizing their defense. She helped organize the scouts, ensuring they had every advantage they could get. It was exhausting work, but Emily found strength in knowing that she was making a difference. As the final preparations were made, Emily and Alexander stood together on the balcony overlooking their pack's territory. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the land. It was a peaceful scene, but Emily couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that hung in the air. Are you ready? Alexander asked, his voice soft. Emily turned to face him, her heart steady. I'm ready, she said, her voice unwavering. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made her heart skip a beat. Then let's make sure we're ready for anything. As the night fell, the pack gathered for their final meeting. Emily stood beside Alexander, her presence as strong and commanding as his. She had come so far from the broken Omega she had once been. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they were unstoppable. The days leading up to the arrival of the rogue wolves were filled with a tension that Emily had never experienced before. Despite the preparations, despite the strength of her pack, there was a constant unease in the air. It was as if the calm before the storm had settled over the entire territory, making everything feel heavier than usual. As Luna, Emily stood beside Alexander, watching over the pack and ensuring everything was in place. She had never been more certain of her place in the world, yet there was a part of her that couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. One evening, as she walked through the palace gardens, the sky above her deepening into shades of purple and gold, she felt a presence at her side. Alexander had quietly joined her, his steps silent but steady. "Are you ready for what's coming?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Emily glanced up at him, her heart swelling with affection. She could see the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders, but she also saw the determination in his eyes. "We've prepared as much as we can," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "We'll face it together." Alexander nodded, his hand gently brushing against hers. "Together," he repeated, the word carrying a weight that both comforted and steadied her. As the days grew shorter and the rogue wolves drew closer, Emily found herself reflecting on everything she had overcome. She was no longer the broken Omega she had once been. She was the Luna of the Alpha King, a leader in her own right, and she would fight to protect her pack, no matter the cost. The night before the attack, Emily couldn't sleep. Her mind was racing with thoughts of the battle ahead, of the lives that depended on them. She walked the palace halls, the echoes of her footsteps filling the silence. She had never been one for fear, but tonight, a sense of urgency had settled in her chest. As she passed by the training grounds, she saw the warriors preparing for the fight, their expressions focused and determined. Among them stood Ethan, one of the most trusted warriors in the pack. His gaze met hers, and for a moment, they shared a wordless understanding. He gave her a nod of reassurance, and she returned it, her heart swelling with pride. She had never been one to seek out attention, but the way the pack looked to her, trusted her, made her realize just how far she had come. She wasn't just the Alpha King's Luna, she was part of this family, part of this pack, and they depended on her as much as she depended on them. When the sun rose the next day, the air was thick with anticipation. Emily stood at Alexander's side, looking out over the territory, knowing that their world was about to change. The pack had gathered, ready for whatever was to come. She could feel the weight of her responsibility, but she also felt something else, hope. They had prepared. They were ready. Together, they would face the storm. As the first signs of the rogue wolves appeared on the horizon, Emily stood tall beside Alexander. The moment had arrived. And she was ready. With a steady breath, she turned to him, her voice unwavering. "Let's do this." Alexander gave her a firm nod, his gaze intense but filled with trust. "Together," he said once more. And with that, they marched forward, side by side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road to victory would not be easy. But Emily knew, deep down, that as long as they stood together, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. The first clash between the pack and the rogue wolves was nothing like Emily had imagined. Despite all the planning, all the strategies they had discussed, the attack came with a force that shook the very ground beneath them. Emily stood beside Alexander, her heart pounding as the pack mobilized around them, each warrior moving with the precision and discipline they had been trained for. She could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of battle, but it was different for her now. As Luna, she was no longer an observer. She was a leader, and every decision she made would affect the future of her pack. The rogue wolves, disorganized at first, quickly regrouped as they came closer to the pack's borders. Emily's eyes scanned the field, watching as her warriors positioned themselves in strategic formations. She could see Alexander in the distance, moving with the agility and strength of a seasoned alpha, his eyes focused, never wavering. He was their leader, their strength, but now, she was by his side, helping to guide the pack in ways she never thought possible. Emily felt a surge of power within her, a quiet but unwavering force that made her feel as though she were a part of something much larger than herself. She wasn't just the Luna of the Alpha King, she was the heart of this pack, the force that would keep them strong and united no matter what. As the rogue wolves drew closer, Emily's instincts kicked in. She moved to the center of the pack, her presence commanding attention. The warriors instinctively parted to allow her to pass, their respect for her growing with each passing day. She was no longer just the Omega who had been rejected, she was Emily Harris, the Luna, and they trusted her. In the chaos of the battlefield, Emily remained calm, her eyes locked on Alexander as he fought to defend their home. Every movement, every strike, every tactic they had discussed came to life in that moment. She felt a deep connection to him, as though their minds and hearts were aligned in perfect harmony. They were one, a force that could not be broken. As the battle raged on, Emily noticed a shift in the rogue wolves. They were no longer just a scattered group of attackers, they had a leader, someone who was trying to rally them together. Emily's heart raced as she realized that this was the real threat. She had heard the whispers of a rogue alpha who sought to overthrow Alexander's reign, to take control of the northern territories. And now, it seemed that the rumors were true. She could see the rogue alpha in the distance, his eyes filled with malice and ambition. But Emily was no longer afraid. She had fought for her place here, and she would fight for her pack. She turned to one of the warriors nearby, a trusted fighter named Ava, and gave her a simple command. Take the flank. We need to cut them off before they regroup. Ava nodded without hesitation, and with a swift motion, she moved to execute the plan. Emily's eyes returned to the rogue alpha. She knew that this was the turning point. If they could defeat him, the pack would remain safe. If not, their entire future was at risk. With a steady breath, she turned to Alexander, who had noticed her focus shift. His eyes met hers, and in that instant, they both understood. He gave her a nod, and together, they moved toward the rogue alpha, ready to face whatever came next. The fight was far from over, but Emily knew, deep down, that they would not lose. They had each other. They had the pack. And together, they were unstoppable. The battle had reached its peak, and the air was thick with the sound of movement, the clash of bodies, and the growl of wolves. Emily's heart raced as she fought alongside Alexander and the warriors, her mind sharp, focused entirely on the task at hand. The rogue wolves had proven to be a formidable force, but Emily knew that they would not be defeated as easily as they hoped. She could feel the bond between her and Alexander growing stronger with every move they made, working in perfect harmony as if they were one entity. Their connection was undeniable, and Emily was more certain than ever that she had found her true place. As the rogue alpha made his way through the battlefield, his eyes burning with ambition, Emily felt her resolve harden. He had come to challenge Alexander, to take what was not his, and she could not let that happen. With every step she took, her confidence grew. She was no longer just an Omega. She was a leader, a protector, and the Luna of the Alpha King. Alexander's gaze met hers across the chaos, and in that brief moment, they both understood. The rogue alpha was their true enemy, and they would face him together. With a sharp command, Alexander rallied the pack, directing them to close in on the rogue alpha. Emily, her body moving with practiced grace, followed at his side, her focus fixed on the enemy ahead. The rogue alpha snarled, his gaze filled with malice, but Emily stood firm, her heart steady and strong. She could feel the power of the pack behind her, and she knew that together, they would win. As the rogue alpha charged toward them, Emily stepped forward, her heart racing with determination. She was ready. She had always been ready for this moment. With a swift movement, she leaped into action, moving with the precision and power that only a Luna could possess. The rogue alpha was strong, but Emily was stronger. With a fierce strike, she brought him down, her heart pounding in her chest. The pack surged forward, their strength and unity overwhelming the rogue wolves. Alexander stood by her side, his presence a constant source of support, as they fought together to protect their home and their people. As the last of the rogue wolves fell, Emily stood tall, her breath coming in quick bursts, but her spirit unbroken. The battle was won, but the victory was not just theirs. It belonged to the entire pack, to the family they had built, and to the love that had guided them through the darkest of times. Alexander turned to her, his eyes filled with admiration and something deeper, something that spoke of the bond they had forged. He reached out, taking her hand in his. "We did it," he said, his voice low, filled with pride. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "We did," she replied. Together, they had faced the challenge and emerged victorious. As the pack gathered around them, their cheers filling the air, Emily knew that this was just the beginning. Their journey was far from over, but they were ready for whatever came next. With Alexander by her side, she had no doubt that they could face anything. They were more than just a pack. They were a family. And together, they were unstoppable. The days after the battle were filled with both relief and quiet reflection. The rogue wolves had been defeated, but Emily knew the peace they had fought for was fragile. Alexander and the pack had done their part, and now it was time to rebuild and strengthen the ties that bound them together. As Luna, Emily felt a deep sense of responsibility, not just for the pack's safety but for their unity and prosperity. She had proven herself in battle, but she knew that her true test had only just begun. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of gold and orange, Emily walked through the palace gardens. The sounds of the pack settled in the distance, but here, in the quiet of nature, she could find peace. She needed it. Her mind was full, and though the victory had been sweet, there was always more to be done. She had made a promise to herself and to Alexander that she would be the leader they needed, but sometimes it felt like an impossible task. "You seem deep in thought," Alexander's voice broke through her musings. She turned to find him standing behind her, his gaze soft yet filled with the usual intensity. "Just thinking about everything that's ahead," Emily said, offering him a small smile. "The pack, the future, there's so much we still have to do." He stepped closer, his presence grounding her. "We'll do it together," he said, his voice unwavering. Emily looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You know I can't do this without you," she said softly. "I never could." Alexander reached for her hand, pulling her gently toward him. "You've always been more than capable, Emily," he said, his voice warm. "But we're partners in this. I can't do it without you, either." They stood there for a moment, their hands entwined, as the world around them grew quieter. In that silence, Emily realized that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. She was no longer the Omega who had been rejected and cast aside. She was Luna, and she had a purpose that went beyond survival. Together with Alexander, she would lead their pack into a new era. The days of uncertainty were behind them, and though the future would always have its trials, Emily felt ready for whatever came next. With Alexander by her side, they were a force stronger than any threat. "I believe in us," Emily said, her voice steady with newfound confidence. "I always will." Alexander smiled, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "And I believe in you, Emily," he whispered, his voice filled with a tenderness that only she could understand. "We'll build the future we've always dreamed of. Together." The moment felt timeless, as if the world itself had paused to honor the bond they shared. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of Alexander's embrace, and in that moment, she knew that the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but also with love, strength, and unity. Together, they would face everything that came their way, for they were not just a pack. They were a family. And no force in the world could break them apart.